Okay, so now that we've done our raw scan, our 3F scan, we're ready to move through to the correction stage of our workflow. So I've got here the image I scanned earlier. If I wanted to correct an image that I'd already scanned, I can click this icon here. This is our thumbnails window icon, and this will bring up our scratch pad, which shows us all the previous scans that we've done, and we can select the image that we want to correct. So I've selected my one here. So what I'm ready to do is, if I've perhaps done a scan that has included some of the black surround, I might want to just crop inside and just redo a perform auto corrections. Okay, so I can click the A again just to double check that. Okay, so we've got a nice sort of auto correct here. There's some tweaks we might want to make, but I'll talk you through it. So let's come here to the first icon, histogram window. Here we have our RGB levels. So using the gamma sliders here, we have our shadows, midtones, and highlights. Okay, so I can use this just to tweak these areas. I'll shift the gamma in these areas, lighten and darken, or I can shift the dark spot, the dark point, or the white point here, the highlights. Okay, as you can see, this is completely throwing out the image. If I make a mistake, I can click redo, reset, or I can start again, select my image, and just do an automatic correction. Okay, so I might just darken the shadows a bit. I really want to have quite a contrast between my highlights here, the focus of the image in the background. I might use my midtones just to complement that. I'm conscious here that my highlights might be blown out slightly, so I am going to just increase the white point here. Okay, yes, that has discolored the highlights now and made it more yellow, but I can tweak that later in color corrections. Below we've got a channels breakdown, so we have red, green and blue, and within that we have the same slider scale of shadows, midtones and highlights. So I can correct that if I want to. So at the moment, for example, I'm conscious that the shadows are quite blue, so I might move down to my shadows in my blue section here and just slide that subtly to the right, just to shift the blue. Okay, so just a very subtle check, and what I can do is click on and off here just to see the difference that the automatic corrections have made and my subtle corrections. Okay, so moving forwards, we next have our gradations window. This will feel familiar as we can see our curvature chart here, but before we get onto that, above we have our contrast, we have our brightness, and we have something here called shadow depth. Out the shadows, it lightens the shadows, but is very effective very quickly, so just be careful when using this, because you might do a small change here too, but actually once you export you'll realise it's quite a dramatic effect. So I do tend to avoid this and do any editing to the shadows using the levels or the curve, but it's there, so it's worth noting. So I might just have that on 1 just to bring out the shadows a bit. I'm actually going to sort of lighten the image a bit by reducing the contrast, and then I'm going to increase the brightness here, which will lighten it up a bit. Okay, so that looks quite good. I'm now going to actually use my curvature chart here to adjust the tonal ranges. So again, left to right, shadows, midtones and highlights. So I actually got 3 points here, shadows, midtones and highlights, and I can tweak that. If there's a specific area of the image I might want to change, for example, the green bokeh sections here in the shadows, I can click that, and this will bring up on my curvature line where that point is, so I can tweak that independently. Okay, so that's good to know. So moving forward to our next stage, I'm just going to hover over our next icon. We've got color correction window. Okay, so this is where we can do our color correction. Again, this is broken down into our individual colors: red, green, blue, cyan, magenta and yellow. We also have saturation here. This isn't independent to the color, this is a general saturation. Okay, so you can see here automatically it's scanned in at 15. You might want to drop that to 0, so then later in another post-production software you can do a sort of slightly more advanced color correction. The general idea here is that you want to get your image to a really nice sort of foundation level, so then you can use Photoshop to sort of move on to the advanced stage later. But here what I'm going to do first of all is just tweak the yellowy greens up here. So I'm going to select yellow, and I'm going to increase the greens just to sort of make it greener. Okay, and if I turn that off and on, we might see a subtle change. I'm just going to increase it so you can see the dramatic change in it. Okay, so this is how we can change and do a sort of color correction. As we can see, it's also changed the greens here, so it's a sort of a global edit. So be careful of that, because you might get one area correct, but it might change for the worse another area. So I'm actually going to lower this right down, leave that about 15. I can do a more advanced edit later once I'm in Photoshop. Okay, the next icon we've got here is texture window. This is actually talking about sort of your sharpness of the image. We've scanned in at -60. It's automatically set to scan at -60 or -40. What we've done actually is lowered the sharpness. Okay, we find that the Flexcolor sort of sharpness algorithm isn't as good as Photoshop or Capture One, so we recommend you don't think about sharpening now. Wait until you're thinking about your output of your image, and then sharpen accordingly. So that's good for us. Okay, we've gone through all the corrections here. If we're completely unhappy, what we can do is click reset, and that's taking us back to the start. It's quite easy to just start again. You can quickly change some things, but once we're ready, we can click save, and then we can save our image either as a TIFF or a JPEG. Okay, so I'm going to save it as a TIFF. There we go. The taskbar is just popped up. It's just saying what we're doing. It's just outputting our saved version of this image, and then we're ready to move on to Photoshop or Capture One or Lightroom.